In this video, we are going to take a look at the very brief basics of rendering and floating using sand and cement. Although saying that, the same principles apply if you are using a gypsum-based backcoat like bonding or hardwall. And that's me. I'll be the star of the show in my stupid little hat. I didn't realise that's what I looked like when I put it on. And we've got the young lad operating the camera, who's an absolute nightmare because he won't keep still. Trying to deal with you is like pulling teeth. You've got to keep the camera in landscape, not portrait, because every time you keep turning it, I have to try and keep editing the flipping video out. Look, he zoomed in on me because I was moaning at him. Right, so I think the best place for us to start anyway is the mixing. Let's get to it and see how we get this stuff knocked up. Right, so you can see here now, the wild one is measuring out waterproofer to add it to the mix. We put this in the scratch coat because it controls the suction for the top coat. Everything we do is measured out, nothing's left to chance. We're following the guidelines on the back of the tub and we're adding the maximum amount of waterproofer that we're allowed to put in for the specifications that are on the back of the tub. Now you'll probably notice that we're mixing in a big refiner mixing tub rather than a cement mixer. Now we do this for a couple of reasons. One, it's so much faster. Two, I haven't got to carry a cement mix around. And three, it's quicker for cleaning. So you would think it'd be slower mixing it with a whisk, but believe me, it's so much faster. I'll probably speed this clip up for you. But just so you know, the total mixing time is 5 minutes. That's how long this mixing clip is. And I'm going to speed it up, but it only took us 5 minutes. And to be fair, the lad could have gone faster, but he didn't have his Weetabix, so it did take the full 5 minutes to mix it. I'll just tell you quickly as well exactly how we're mixing this. We do a 4-to-1 mix, 1 cement to 4 sand. Now this tub will hold 4 25kg bags of sand and 1 25kg bag of cement, and it'll be full to the brim. Now we don't bother buying loose sand anymore. What we basically do is just put 1 full bag of cement in and then fill the tub to the top full of sand. But did you notice we put a bit of sand in first? That's because if you just tip cement straight in, it'll drop straight to the bottom and clump up round the bottom of the tub. So we always throw a couple of shovelfuls of sand in first, just to give the water a bit of body so that the cement doesn't sink straight to the bottom, and it just mixes in a lot nicer then. We asked the builders merchants for plastering sand. We never use red building sand for rendering. Some fellas do, but I don't like to because it's not quite as strong, so it's more prone to cracking. I prefer to use a plastering sand, the sharp wash sand, the grit sand. This stuff they sent us was absolutely full of rocks, so it wasn't too fun to use, and I was picking stones out non-stop. But, you know, it did the job, so it is what it is. So the mix I'm using is 1 bag of cement to the ratio of 4-to-1 sand, 1 litre of waterproofer, and a bit of water to get the right consistency. So here we are now. Start putting this scratch coat on. Now, there's a principle that you need to follow. Wet on wet. If you haven't sealed the background, damp it down. Water acts like a flux and it helps the render adhere to the brickwork. You don't want to put your render on bone dry bricks because the bricks will just suck the moisture out your render and it'll dry before it's had a chance to set and it'll just be weak. Also, anyone with a sharp eye is going to notice that there's no beads on the bottom of the walls. Now, there's a reason for this. I'm not doing a normal render, but I'll tell you more about that later in the video. Right, so come here and look at this. So I'm scratching, I'm doing wiggly lines like that. And if you look, if you zoom in and look, where the lines go down here, there's a gap down inside the scratch, and then where the lines go, when it comes up here, it goes in the other way. So if you can imagine, when the top coat is on that, it's sort of interlocked. It can't lift off because it's sunken at the top, and it can't pull down because it's sunken at the bottom. So basically the whole thing is locked. The top coat can't come away from it. And that's one way of scratching. Some fellas scratch like this, and what happens is in the winter, and with this, if the wall gets wet, water will sit in the scratches, so when you come to put your top coat on, there'll actually be water just sat inside these, which causes a bit of a nightmare for you. So what some of the old boys used to do was, they would scratch it like this, And the idea was that water wouldn't sit in the scratches, it would run out. It would all run out. I like this way. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think it makes a massive difference, to be fair. If the top coat's going to come off, it's going to come off. And it normally comes down to how strong your mix is. But this is the way I prefer. I just think it looks nice. So now we'll start putting the floating coat on. This is the next coat, and this is what we're going to rule off to get nice and flat. When you render it, you start from the right and work your way to the left. When you're working from this way, from the left to the right, as you're coming up, your sweep is there and stuff drops off. Now if I'm coming back the other way, watch what happens when I come back the other way. If I'm coming back this direction, none drops. Because it's getting tied in. It's getting the last little bit that isn't getting pressed on by the trowel because the stuff's so thin because you're running out, is being pressed into the last pass. So instead of just dropping off, it ties in. So that's why you work from the right to the left, because it might not seem a lot, but by the end of the wall, look, it's dropping off as I'm talking to you. By the end of the wall, you'll have wasted, I don't know, 5 or 6 handboards full of stuff. So right to left, and then that way, it's just getting tied in all the time. Right, so now we've got a bit on the wall, we can start ruling off. You could put the whole wall on first before you rule off, but because this is the first part of the job that I'm ruling off, I'm going to get a little section on first and give it a bit of a rule, just so I can see how long it takes to pick up. The last thing you want to do is get a whole wall on and then get back to the start and realise it's gone off too much and you can't rule it, it's too firm. So I'm just putting a little section on and then start hitting it with the rule. Now if you look closely, you can see I'm using a derby, which is like a little straight edge with 2 handles, and the reason being is because as you're pulling stuff off the wall, rather than having to throw it back into the bucket, you have got the opportunity to stick it back on the wall again. You could use a feather edge rule, a box rule, or a derby, whatever you fancy. Has anyone with a sharp eye noticed there's a big timber lintel left exposed at the top? Or have you noticed that they've got no beads on round the bottoms? There's a good reason for this. This job isn't your typical scratch coat and float sand and cement type of job. The customer actually wants a K-rend. But the problem that he had was that the walls on this whole section of the house are all out of shape. See, this was an extension that was built back in the 60s, and it was a garage extension, and we're thinking that possibly the previous owner built it himself, because none of the walls were straight or plumb, and there was 2 big garage doors underneath that timber lintel, and the brickwork that had been bricked up in there, that wasn't straight either. So basically, this whole wall was just a pig's ear. Now, other fellas have come along with different ideas of taking the wall down and rebuilding it and stuff. The customer didn't want to pay out for that. So I come up with a solution for him, and I'd scratch coat the wall and float it in sand and cement to get it straight, and then we'd put the K-Ren base coat on, beads, mesh, and top coat. Now the reason we didn't do all the building out in K-Ren base coat is because it's too expensive, and it just would have cost near on £1,000 just in base coat to get this wall anywhere near as straight as what it needs to be. The timber lintel at the top will eventually be shaved back when the joiner gets on site. He's going to shave that back of his plane, then he's going to attach some cement board to it, and we're going to K-Ren base coat straight over the top of that and mesh it. Now for anyone that's wondering, why don't we just put the mesh in the sand and cement? Well, the reason is, mesh doesn't go too well in sand and cement because the particles of sand don't go through the little squares on the mesh very well. Whereas when you use K-Ren base coat, the aggregate is that small in the base coat, it sticks it really well. So it's just a case of what's going to produce the best job at the end. Anyway, enough of all that now. I just wanted to quickly explain to you why things are the way they are on this job. let's get back to just floating so we can look a bit deeper into what's going on. When you get hollows, see there now, there's a hollow, yeah, so fire it back in. So just finishing this wall off now, getting the last little bits in there. Now notice when see the stones I'm picking out, paint in the backside. Sand was full of big rocks. You'll notice I'm just lashing it on. I'm not spending too long trying to get it smooth with the trowel and flat because I'm going to hit it with the rule. So the idea now is just get it on, just on. Don't worry about trying to get it too smooth. Just get it on the wall and then get the rule on it. I've just noticed as well, the lad's left the radio on. Now I did tell him, make sure you turn the radio off because I'll get in trouble with YouTube if I've got music playing in the background. Now I'll tell you the funny story. I reckon he's done this on purpose. Like this job's for a friend of mine, I know him. Now when we turned up at the job, we were getting all set up and I said hello to my mate's missus, Kelly, and anyway we got started and I said to the young lad, Kelly's just asked if you want a cup of tea or coffee, and I didn't know what she wanted. I said, so give her a knock, go and knock on, and tell her what you're having to drink. Anyway, she hadn't said nothing, so the young lad knocks on the front door, doesn't he? She answers the front door, and he said, I'll have a cup of tea, please, 2 sugars. So she was like, oh, you will you? You cheeky little sod. Hey, you've just got to have a laugh in work, haven't you? Whatever passes the time best. Now you see now, when I'm ruling off, I'll go up first rather than across. And the reason I'm going up is because the bulk of the material that I'm going to take off is going to be in the first couple of passes because I've laid it on sort of rough. So if I take it off sideways, more chance of it slipping off the derby or the feather edge and sliding straight on the floor. So I always go up first. Once I've sort of got it straight enough going up, then I'll start going across. And if you notice when I go sort of horizontal, I'll sort of sweep up at the end as well, and that's because as I'm starting to get more stuff built up on the rule, to stop it sliding off, I'll just finish with a little curl up to the vertical position. See, like up there now, rather than just going straight across, I'll go across, and then up just a little bit. Just you get a feel for it. What you don't want to do is go across too far and get a load of stuff sort of building up, and then all of a sudden, because it's so heavy, it starts sliding and just going all over the floor. Again, this is the beauty of using a derby. If you use a feather edge, it's not as easy to put back on the wall. You have to basically, go and drop it back on the spot board and put it back on with your handboard and trowel, whereas with the derby, you can just sort of reapply it. Little side note as well, a lot of fellas use feather edges, and the reason for the feather edge, the reason it's not square and it's got a little tapered end, originally that was just so you could get into the corners of walls easier, because if you just had just a piece of wood, a square piece of wood, say, you'd struggle to rule from the ceiling lines down and from the the internal angles out, so they chamfered them off and then they just fitted into the angles a lot neater. So that's how you get it on and get it ruled off. Now I've sort of closed this in because for what I'm doing, this is basically just another scratch coat when I'm getting it dead flat. Now if you're going to rub this up, if you're going to do an external render and rub it up smooth, or if you're going to do an internal render and rub it with the devil float, it's exactly the same process now. Now, see the stuff here now, as I've ruled it off, I've sort of closed it in, I've left this on such an angle that it's left it smooth. That isn't what you would want to do. What you would want to do is give it more of an edge, like this, and leave the stuff open, like that. See the difference? See, this is open, yeah, and this is smooth. Now when you've got it open like that, leave it, let it go right in. You don't want it to dry out, you don't want it to go the light colour like it's drying, but you want to wait until that feels crispy to touch. Like if I touch that now, it's wet, I'm easily leaving fingerprints and closing it, but if I let that go crispy, it'll feel like almost like crummy on the top. That's when it's ready to hit with your float. Devil float if you're inside, leaving your bit of a key, or if you do an external bend and you just want it smooth, then you hit it with just the normal polyurethane float, and that's when it'll rub up lovely. You don't try and rule it off like this and hit it now when it's wet, because you'll just dig in. You've got to let the stuff pick up. And the reason you leave it open, it lets the air get deeper into it, so it dries it out better. There's a bit of a wind as well, so it's going to really dry this out faster. If I left it closed like this, I've got to wait so much more longer for it to dry out. Whereas if I leave it open, it dries out quite quick, and it's easier to rub up. And then as you're rubbing it with your float, I can't show you because I just haven't got one with me, but as you're rubbing it with your float, you'll get a build up around the edge of the float, a bit like this. And any hollow bits that you get, say for instance you're rubbing it up and you get a bit of a hollow bit, you can just pick it off your float, throw it off and rub it in, and that's how you'll fill your hollows out with your float as you're going. But as I said to you, I'm not leaving it open because I'm not rubbing it up, so I'm just going to close this off now. For us, come here, show them how flat it is, and you go look down the wall now. Now if you can see the camera how flat that is. This was a bit of a wonky built garage with two garage doors that have been infilled by someone that's not really a bricklayer. So this whole wall was in and out. So what we're doing is we're just flattening it off, because this is eventually going to have K-rend on it. I've used sand and cement to level it out. We're going to put K-rend base coat on. I've used sand and cement to level it out, mainly because the expense of K-rend base coat. If I had just used base coat, this wall would have probably cost just in base coat near on £1,000. We've used sand and cement, which has cost about £100 to get it straight. Now the reason I'm still going to use the K-rend base coat is because when I put the mesh on, the aggregate and the sand, the grains of sand are too big to get a good bond through the mesh. So I'm going to use sand and cement base, and then I'm going to put mesh on, and I'm going to bed it in with the K-rend base coat, because the aggregate in the base coat will go through the mesh a lot easier, and it'll get a better bond stuck to the wall. But I'll be putting the beads on and what have you first, so it'll all get beaded up, and then it'll get K-rend meshed with the base coat ready to receive the top coat. But I just wanted to show you how we level the walls off. This is basic principles of how to float a wall. You scratch coat, and then your floating coat ruled off with your derby or your feathered edge. I've used a derby. A feathered edge does get it slightly truer, but my van's broke. My feathered edge is in the van, so I'm working with what I've got. But that's the basic principles of it. So you'll never need to do this, but I'm giving you a little bit of extra insight into what I'm doing. I've put over a ton of sand and cement on this wall, and I'll be out in front of the beads if I put beads on first. So I'm just straightening it off now, because my beads are going to sit on the top of this. So because we're building this wall out straight first, we can't put the beads on first, because the biggest beads you can get are 15mm, and we're probably out about 12mm now. We've still got to get K-rend base coat on, we've still got to get K-rend on, so I'm having to straighten it out first, and we're going to put the beads on top of that. So because of that, to make sure we get a nice straight line to work off, I've just string lined it from one side to the other. Now there's different bricks here, but the fella's happy to paint these, that's what he wants to do. to make sure I get this nice and straight for the beads to sit on. Put a string line across. I'm just working my way across now because I've done the majority of the wall. I got it as close as I could, sort of freehand, and now I'm just working to the string line, just bringing the bottom of the wall flush with it, and then anything that goes below the string line, I just pop off like that, and it's giving us a nice straight line now, so that it's going to be very easy to put the beads on. And I'll just bed the beads on with some pink grip, and then K-Rend base coat them on, and they won't be going nowhere. But it just means we don't want the beads going on. I don't want to put a bead on here and see sand and cement sticking down behind it. So I know if I string line it first and cut it off, make sure there's nothing sort of sticking down the wall, then it'll look sound. And once the beads are on, the K-Rend's on, you know, this will be set a little bit further back, but you'll never notice. You'll never know that this wall was all over the place and that I've been in working my magic. Oh, here we go. Found another clip where he'd filmed me lying down on the job. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like. If you think it could help someone else, feel free to share it. But whatever you choose to do, hey, thanks for watching.